Hello, I'm Judy Trotter. I head up Adult Education and Learning at JW3. We've had some wonderful events over the last few years, and we wanted to share those with you while the building is closed. We do hope you enjoy them, and if you would like to, please do leave a donation on the webpage. In the meantime, please enjoy, stay safe, be well, and look after yourselves. And we look forward to seeing you when the building is open again. Bye for now.
Good evening and welcome to our very first live online event that we're doing. We have been having classes and language courses already moved online over the last few days. This is the first time we are trying to do this. And I'm delighted to say that when we announced that JW3 was going to have to close its physical doors for the time being, the very first person in the entire Jewish world that contacted me to say, how can I help? What can I do for you? Was the mensch himself, Anshel Pfeffer. Really genuinely the very first person that contacted me. And the first thing he said was, I see you're moving to online content. I'm very happy to offer to do something about Bibi and the current situation in Israel, if you think it will be of interest. But there was no if there. Right, this is news that when we're not following the news about coronavirus, we're all glued to our iPads and the newspapers following what is going on in Israel. And who better to help try and guide us through the current situation than Anshel Pfeffer? I'm sure you all know Anshel and read him. You know that he's an award-winning journalist and author, that he's the senior correspondent and columnist for Haaretz, which many of us read online or in print, the Israeli correspondent for The Economist. You'll have also read him over recent years in The Guardian, in the Jewish Chronicle and elsewhere. And I'm sure, like me, many of you have read and absolutely love his book that's almost coming up for its second birthday. 2 years ago, Anshel's book was published, Bibi, The Turbulent Life and Times of Benjamin Netanyahu, the man who has been Prime Minister since, I think, 1948, although Anshel can correct me. So without further ado, I would like to give a warm welcome. You can give him a round of applause from your own home. We'll keep him on mute, but a warm round of applause for Anshel Pfeffer.
Thanks everyone for joining. Raymond said I was the first person. I'm sure many more people have spoken to Raymond over the last few days about how much, what an important place JW3 has in all of our hearts, and how much this place means to anybody who cares about Jewish culture in Britain and anywhere for that matter. So JW3 is a place where it was still in before its inauguration, and Raymond showed me around. So I'm really happy to be chatting with anyone who feels like I do about how much JW3 really means to what I feel is my community, both my British Jewish community and to my global Jewish community. I think JW3 is very much a heart of that. How do we begin talk about Israeli politics on a day like this? If any of you have been following the last few hours in Israeli politics, you'll know that Netanyahu has once again pulled a rabbit out of his hat. In an interview just 4 days ago, Netanyahu, who is now the face of Israel's response to coronavirus, said, I'm spending 98% of my time fighting the virus and only 2% of the time on politics. That may be true, but 2% of Netanyahu's time obviously goes a long way. And in the last few hours, he's achieved what no one expected, and that he totally broke down the opposition of Benny Gantz, the leader of the opposition, until, well, officially still leader of the opposition, and a large number of his colleagues. And he seems to have convinced them in some way to come over to him, come over to his coalition, to his emergency coalition. Strong reasons to come together at the point. Israel's been in political deadlock for 15 months now, and yet 24 hours ago it seemed that things were going the other way. Gantz and the rest of the opposition had forced the Speaker of the Knesset, Yuli Edelstein, a Likud member, to resign. It was a long and difficult campaign against Edelstein, who was trying to hold on with his fingernail to the Speaker's office. It involved the Supreme Court and repeated injunctions from the Supreme Court which finally pushed Edelstein out. And it seemed that they were going to take control of parliamentary business, a pretty similar way to what happened in the UK 7 or 8 months ago when Brexit was not yet a done deal. It seemed as if Netanyahu was beginning to be slowly but surely eased out of office by an opposition, which was beginning to function, which was taking over the Knesset, taking over the committees. This morning, for the first time in, I can't remember how long, new committees were finally formed in the Knesset. Officials were summoned and brought to account, and we were beginning to hear for the first time some serious answers about how the government is handling the pandemic. And all of a sudden, sometime at midday, things began to go awry. Suddenly we were hearing that the blue and white, Gantz's party, their candidate for the job proposed for the office before the vote, which was to take later today. But suddenly Benny Gantz was going to be the candidate himself. And this is obviously very strange. Benny Gantz is the candidate for prime minister. Why would he be putting his name forward to be the Knesset speaker? And as it transpired, within a few minutes, Gantz had reached some kind of a deal with Netanyahu. That deal was contingent on not replacing the speaker with a member of blue and white, but also the member who was intended as a guy called Meir Cohen, and not just a member of blue and white, but a member of the Yesh Atid faction, which is led by Yair Lapid and is resolutely opposed to joining a Netanyahu coalition. So Gantz, by suddenly inserting himself what will probably be temporarily into the job of Knesset speaker, was basically saying to Netanyahu, I'll hold the speaker's gavel until we reach our deal. And over the next 2 or 3 hours, the details began coming out. The deal, as far as we know, has not yet been signed, but the deal seems to include a promise from Netanyahu that in 18 months, he will make way for Gantz and Gantz will become prime minister. And in the meanwhile, Gantz will support him, despite all Gantz's commitments not serving under a prime minister facing criminal indictments for bribery and fraud, as Netanyahu is, and everything else that has been said. Gantz has been the target for the last 14 months of a relentless smear campaign by Netanyahu proxy in the media. They've said the most terrible things about Gantz. His mobile phone, which was hacked by the Iranians, had all these lurid videos in it, and all that kind of crazy stories. None of them have been substantiated about Gantz, but this is what Gantz has been undergoing for the last 14 months. And despite all this, he's found a way to sit down and, as far as we know, reach a coalition deal with the man who has been orchestrating that smear campaign for over a year now. And I think the reason is, I haven't spoken to Benny Gantz today, but I think the reason is that he's just simply exhausted. He's been he's been on the receiving end of this for so long. He hasn't found a way to form a coalition, even though the opposition does have a majority. Members of his own party won't support him if he forms a minority government supported by the joint list. And at the same time, the coronavirus crisis really is a moment which Gantz feels that as a patriot, he cannot stand aside and continue contributing to Israel's political deadlock while people are dying in increasing numbers. So far, the situation hasn't got out of hand in Israel, but things aren't looking great. And we're back to Netanyahu once again. Netanyahu, who we've counted out so many times we've said that the man is finished. He can't carry on again. He can't continue winning election after election, and his predicament and continuous price. Well, all the investigations have been undergoing, and then the indictments, and he lost his chance at getting parliamentary immunity. All that has happened, and he's still there. He's still in command. He's still briefing Israelis most nights on the situation of coronavirus, and the polls have been in his favor in the last few weeks because he is there on the Israeli screens. Everyone's stuck at home due to the lockdown. Everyone is hungry for information, for some kind of figure of authority and Netanyahu has dominated that that public sphere, the coronavirus information sphere. It may turn out to be a bad decision for him. If things go really badly, then he'll be seen, he will be seen as the face of Israel's response, and he'll get the blame. But for now, he is the reassuring figure. Even Israelis who didn't vote for him and voted for parties opposed to him. Many people I've spoken to in the last few weeks, last few days, people who I know did not support him, think he should have left, would have been very happy to see him lose earlier this month after the election, are saying, you know what, he's someone that we can trust, he's someone who's in control of things, he's someone that that is obviously much more experienced than Benny Gantz. It's good that Netanyahu is in control for now, and there's this myth has been created that Netanyahu is in control, and it's been created very effectively by appointing a coronavirus czar or someone to sort of be in charge of all the government's response. He's the one making all the decisions. He's the one also informing the nation in briefings and interviews and Facebook Live broadcasts and so on. And this has been the way Netanyahu has succeeded throughout his career. Obviously, he's never faced something like a pandemic, but he's always known to carry on winning, to carry on dominating. He needs to rule the media cycle. And Netanyahu has always had this incredible knack, even when he seems to be losing, even when he's down, to grab hold of the agenda, grab hold of the media cycle, and turn it to his own purposes. And we've seen this throughout the last 14 months during the election. Every moment when it seemed that the focus would be now on Netanyahu's indictment and how he can't continue. Suddenly something came up. Donald Trump made some kind of a gesture, the deal of the century. Then before that we had the sovereignty over the Golan. Suddenly the favor and return a body of a missing in action Israeli soldier from 30 or 40 years ago, or release an Israeli backpacker who was arrested in Moscow airport for drug smuggling. Somehow these things always happen at the moment Netanyahu needed most to change the political agenda. Obviously, nobody's going to blame Netanyahu for coronavirus, but when this crisis begins, I don't want to talk here about how well Israel is or isn't handling the crisis. I think there's some good things that the Netanyahu government has done, and some other things where there are other areas where they can be criticized. But this is just so typical, the way he's taken this all upon himself to lead and to be the face of this, because this is the moment he knew he has to show Israelis, I am this indispensable figure of authority. Whatever you think of me, whatever you think of my wife and my son on Twitter, it doesn't matter. You know you need me. You know that I'm the person to go, who you want to go and fight for you, and I'm here in your living rooms every night, and I'll tell you what's what. And this is just Netanyahu classic. And lo and behold, last week the trial was about to begin, and wonderful timing. It was postponed because of coronavirus. This doesn't happen to any other politician in the world. That the timing just is always perfect for him. And a lot of people say Netanyahu is like Donald Trump. He's a populist. He manipulates the media. He's dishonest, etc., etc. And look what a great relationship he has with Trump. But the truth is, Netanyahu is like Trump just in a couple of things. Yes, he has that touch with the media, and he also has this of really touching the phobias and the inner fears of his right-wing base of voters. Trump and Netanyahu are not people who come from the working class and from the downtrodden. They're both. Trump was the son of a millionaire. Netanyahu was the son of a quite successful academic. None of them ever lacked for anything. They belong to the elites that they so pretend to hate. They were born into those elites, and yet they both have this knack of stoking the fears and the phobias of of the right-wing base and of the what they may call in America blue-collar voters in Israel. It's more the religious and the Mizrahi communities. They know how to touch on them. But that's where the similarity between Netanyahu and Trump ends, because Netanyahu is a deep thinker. He is someone who, Trump has never read a book in his life. He wrote a best-selling book. Obviously, it was written by a ghostwriter. Netanyahu is a voracious reader. He's constantly sucking up knowledge. He reads biographies and history and books on the economy. He's not much of a novel reader, but non-fiction he's massive on. And when he flies abroad on trips, then he's constantly stealing away the books of his advisors, because he's finished his own book and he goes on to someone else's book. And he thinks about these things. He's intellectual. He has ideas, and he has a grasp of geopolitics. Trump does not. I always think that if in many is much more similar to Boris Johnson than he is to Trump, because Boris, in the same way, he's a great showman, he's a great storyteller in the way that Netanyahu is, but he is also a very clever chap. He may not always be so evident, but he's a reader and he's a writer. He was an editor, and I think they're very similar also in the sense that they're both professional politicians. They're both are people who understood how to make the political machine work for them. And I was thinking about this just the other day. I can't remember who. Some British columnist wrote about Boris's response to coronavirus, and that he's not a good bearer of bad tidings. He's not someone who finds it easy, or certainly not popular, to tell the nation that we're facing a very difficult time in history, and we're facing sacrifice and suffering. It doesn't come naturally to Boris. And watching Netanyahu over the last few days, I thought that he has the same kind of problem. These are really not his best speeches. He's a fantastic speech maker. Any one of you who's ever watched one of Netanyahu's really good speeches, his United Nations General Assembly speeches, his AIPAC speeches, a few weeks ago when the campaign here was still ongoing in Israel, he nightly made 2 or 3 speeches, and they really were some of his best. Really, some of his best hits. They're well constructed. There's a whole there's an narrative arc to each of his speeches. It's all about him, obviously, and it's all about how wonderful Israel is doing. And right now, we sort of present a situation where Israel, like every other country now, that's now confronting the virus, is facing the unknown, and is facing a period when really bad things may happen. He seems less sure of himself. He likes to say how wonderful everything Israel is doing against the virus is, and how every world leader is calling him up to praise him, and people are adopting Israel's steps, and so on and so forth. And a lot of that is rubbish, though. But at the end of the day, his job in these speeches is to warn Israelis of bad things that may happen if they don't stay at home, if they don't isolate themselves, if they don't abide by the lockdown rules. And it's not coming naturally to him. It's not the kind of story he likes telling, because it's not about himself. It's about a faceless global pandemic, not something that he can relate to, as in Iran or in other Arab enemies that he's always been very much more effective at talking against. And it's not something where he can really be the champion. He doesn't understand it. He doesn't. Few people do understand it, and this really creates for him we're seeing here a much less confident Netanyahu, even though he has succeeded in grasping the moment and becoming the face of it for Israelis right now. Anyway, and Sam from Judy has some questions, so maybe we'll do some questions and we'll carry on from there. Hello, any questions? I'll carry on until.
Sorry, just unmute myself. Yes, I think people have been listening
very hard. But as we're actually, oh no, we're not quite at 8 yet. And maybe just keep going for another 6 minutes, and then we can do the NHS and come back to questions. Yes, do put your questions on chat, please.
Good. Oh, okay, good. So you've got a few more minutes to go questions, and after the NHS clap, we'll continue. Another very interesting thing that we've been seeing in the last 3 weeks, and they really reflect how Netanyahu works, is the constant campaign. And Netanyahu came off a very punishing campaign schedule in the last few weeks of the election campaign. He was doing 2 or 3 shows every night. He immediately embarked on his new coronavirus campaign, and at the same time, he continued. Worked sadly that he didn't have a majority at the end of this election 3.5 weeks ago. He wasn't that far off. He did increase Likud's share, but the coalition was still lacking 3 seats for a majority. He immediately grasped that the only way that he could be pushed out of office was either for Benny Gantz to form a minority government with the support of the Arab-dominated joint list from the outside, or to pass some kind of legislation in the Knesset which would prevent an indicted prime minister from remaining in office. And as he said in his interview, 2% of his time has been devoted to politics, but those 2% were very well targeted. He targeted the issue of the joint list, constantly reminding Israelis of how the joint list Knesset members are all terror supporters, and how unthinkable it would be to even have them in government, even at a time of urgency. He coined the phrase not in normal times and not in times of emergency. And this was something that he drilled, and his proxies continued drilling away at it. And it eroded the chances of Gantz forming that government, and so, because some of Gantz's allies were very worried about a public backlash if they do form a government with the support of the joint list. And on the issue of the legislation, he held on as long as he could to the role of speaking not Bibi himself, but his proxy or his stooge, Yuri Edelstein, to keep hold on to parliamentary business to stop the chance of such a law being passed. And this is just how Bibi's always worked. He does not campaign just in the few months and weeks leading up to an election. He is constantly campaigning. His political survival and the next election around the world, and whatever rivals he feels maybe lurking there, he'll always be focused on them, no matter what he's facing, whether it's the Iranian nuclear program or coronavirus. He'll always be campaigning at the same time. And most politicians don't really enjoy elections. Most politicians just can't wait for an election to be over. They can get down to the reason that they went into politics, to governance, or if they're in the opposition, then to holding the government to account. Netanyahu lives for the campaign. He constantly feels that he is under attack. He's under pressure. He's suspicious of all his political rivals who may at any point be plotting to usurp him, and therefore he's always on the boil. He's always campaigning. He's always thinking of the next election. He's always taking polls, checking what the public are thinking. He's always looking at who is coming up in his own party, who he has to sort of push down, so no rivals will grow around him. He's always looking at who may be the next potential leader. They're always under a microscope, and he's always very, very sure that he has the ammunition against them. He uses it at the best time for him, and in that sense, he is a complete politician, because he's both campaigning and governing at the same time. And that, I don't know. Actually, maybe Trump. I don't know any other politician anywhere in the world who has this ability to be on these 2 tracks at the same time, of a relentless election campaign, even when the election campaign isn't actually happening, and to be in government and to hold on to government and not let go for any moment. I think.
Anshel, do you think that Gantz and Lieberman would have gone through with a minority government supported by Joint Left?
We just say it's difficult to follow up on a clap to the NHS back and go back to Israeli politics. And even though I'm sitting here in Jerusalem about that, would they have gone through? I think so. I think that they were at a point, certainly last Monday, where, and it was a very brief point, but I think they were at a point where they would have gone through with it if they could have secured all the votes necessary to pass the minority government, to inaugurate the minority government, to confirm it in an initial vote of confidence. And I think they were because, like everyone else in Israeli politics, and everyone else who's not part of the Netanyahu camp, they were massively eager to finally replace the government, to finally see Netanyahu leave the residents in Balfour Street, and to finally let some air into Israeli politics. You know, Israeli politics has been so suffocating for so long. It's all been about one issue: yes, Netanyahu or no Netanyahu. And Blue and White is not even a real party in many ways. It's just a platform to try and replace Netanyahu, and that's their raison d'etre. And I think they were capable of doing it. Lieberman is certainly, with all his, I'd say, racist hatred and incitement of the Arab Israeli politicians, I think he would have joined in a government supported by them as well, just to get rid of Netanyahu. But like I said, it was a brief moment before Netanyahu staged just his latest comeback.
Great, thank you. So perhaps I should have started with this one, which was, do you think that coronavirus will work for Bibi in the same way that the Falklands did for Thatcher?
You know, I was 9 years old, so I don't remember the Falklands War that well. But if I'm not mistaken, it ended in a victory for Britain. So that obviously revived Maggie's prospects and continued what came a long period at number 10. It all depends on how this how this pandemic pans out. If I mean, obviously I don't want to predict terrible things happening in any country about it, but if Israel somehow remains this island of relative health, and the early steps taken by the Netanyahu government to close down the borders and prevent the infection spreading into Israel, if it turns out to have been the right decision, and it prevents massive casualties, then it could very well become Netanyahu's Falklands. However, what is happening at the same time is the crisis, which is still in control. There's a lot of shortcomings in Israel. Has never been a leader interested in social affairs. He's never had a plan. You know, he's been Israel's longest serving leader, a total of 14 years. He's never had a plan of reforming the health services. He's never had much plans for education or for social services either. You know, he's interested in macroeconomics. He's interested in security. He's interested in geopolitics. He's interested in fighting Iran. He's always been very dismissive of these issues. It's not the kind of thing which he spent time on. And as a result, even though Israeli medical services are of high quality, the hospitals are also quite overcrowded, and resources and personnel are at low level. And we're beginning to see this all coming out now in light of the coronavirus crisis. More attention is finally being paid to the health services. Yes, we have our version of the NHS here, which is free at the point of delivery, each to their own needs, but the hospitals are intolerably overcrowded and understaffed, and we're seeing this now in this crisis. So if the crisis doesn't end as well as Netanyahu claims it's going to, then it could be quite the opposite of the Falkland Wars for him.
Thanks. What do you think the Yuli Edelstein rationale was? What do you think the real issue was?
I find it hard to believe that a man like Yuli Edelstein, who went to the Gulag for his As we all know, he was a prisoner of Zion in his younger years before he was finally allowed to move to Israel, and he was imprisoned by the Soviet Union for teaching Hebrew. I find it hard to believe that he did what he did this week in defying the High Court just because he's Netanyahu's patsy. I think he is part of a significant section of the Israeli public, Israeli politics, who do think that the High Court has too much power and think that the balance of powers between the judiciary and the parliament and the executive branch needs perhaps readdressing. On the other hand, I think that he would have probably have bowed to the wishes of the High Court earlier if it wasn't for Netanyahu pressuring it. So I think there was a mixture of principle and political expediency. But is that a rationale? Edelstein, like everyone else, is very, very much a part of this epic clash between the pro-Bibis and the anti-Netanyahus, and he's on one of the sides here, and he had to do whatever it takes to try and make his side win. And he actually bought time for Netanyahu to try and get this deal through. So it seems now to have worked.
Okay. Do you think Lieberman has burnt all his bridges in the right bloc now? And would that matter?
Well, he certainly burnt his bridges with the bloc. We'll never trust him again after what he did back last May, when he bolted from the coalition at the last moment and denied Netanyahu a victory in the first of the 3 consecutive elections. And I think he's no interest in rebuilding his bridges with Netanyahu. I think he reached a point at the end of 2018 where he decided that he would never really have as much influence as he desires under Netanyahu, because Netanyahu doesn't really let any politician, any minister have that much influence. I think he decided that he wants to try and turn a page on this. I mean, he's basically said as much in many discussions that I've heard about, that he's sworn to ending the Netanyahu era in Israeli politics. But when you say burning his bridges to the right bloc is no longer necessarily the Netanyahu bloc. Blue and White, Gantz's party, had very right-wing elements. Some of them will be going with Gantz into the coalition, but some of them, like the one led by Moshe Ya'alon, a very hardline former defense minister under Netanyahu, certainly a right-winger, have also irrevocably burnt their bridges with Netanyahu. It's no longer right against left. It hasn't been for quite a while. The Israeli left is a very small and weak and fragile thing right now. It's a sort of center left-wing anti-Netanyahu and a religious and right-wing nationalist Netanyahu bloc. And Lieberman decided he's not part of that bloc, but the Israeli political scene is no longer right against left, and the bridges, so many bridges have been burnt and are being rebuilt now because Israeli politics is in an unnatural state as long as it's all about Netanyahu's personal fate, and that's what it is about now.
Okay, so if we look at the unity government, how do you think it will actually work?
Well, first of all, as I said before, the deal hasn't been signed yet. I mean, I've spoken to people who've seen drafts of the deal, but those drafts are drafts, and we can't be certain that Netanyahu or Gantz will finally sign. What we do know, that Netanyahu is promising to make way for Gantz in 18 months. The question is, what will make him keep that promise? There are various ideas of some kind of legal mechanism which will keep him to his promise. There's still yet to be revealed. Some of the key ministries will be given to Gantz's loyalists, including the defense ministry and very crucially the justice ministry, because as far as Gantz is concerned, and he basically said this already in his election night speech, the most important thing is for Netanyahu not to defy the rule of law. So Netanyahu has to, when the courtrooms are functional once again, once the pandemic recedes a bit, Netanyahu will not avoid going on trial. He's been indicted. The whole process has been has led to this, so he has to go on trial. And Gantz's number one condition is that Netanyahu, even if he's still prime minister, will still have his day in court and face the prosecution, face the judges, face the state witnesses, etc. And that's why the Justice Ministry is such a key ministry. That's why Gantz is insisting that in any deal he will control that ministry. Beyond that, this could be quite a stable coalition, because together with the Netanyahu bloc, which is 58 seats in the 120-seat Knesset, Gantz is bringing with him approximately another 15 NKs. There may be 2 or 3 other NKs coming from what used to be Labour, Gesher Meretz. So potentially there's around 75, perhaps a slightly more than that, members of this coalition. They could be quite stable. And because Netanyahu will have to be on his best behavior for Gantz, it won't be a coalition which will veer in any radical way to the right or to the religious parties, even though, of course, they'll be there and they'll be taking care of their interests. But everything now is still contingent on how the coronavirus crisis pans out. We could see a much bigger crisis engulfing Netanyahu's premiership very soon.
Okay, and how do you think the economy is going to cope, and how will the government cope with the dealing with the economy?
I'm sorry, the question was there was a bit of an audio problem there. Could you repeat it?
How will the economy cope, both with what's happening with the government and also with the virus?
Well, the Israeli economy in many ways seemed to be doing very well just until a couple of weeks ago. Surpluses were high, all the indices were doing well. Unemployment was at record lows. But at the same time, the deficit has been growing over the last couple of years. And this probably wasn't the best time for Israel to go into a massive global recession. We've already seen unemployment cross the 500,000 point, which hasn't been for many years in Israel that high. Obviously, massive investment is going to be needed in the health system to both face the coronavirus crisis and rebuild afterwards, and in rebuilding the economy. But Israel has currently over $113 billion of reserves, which obviously it can rely on. And I think that the Israeli economy is well positioned to bounce back, because it's a knowledge-based economy. Most of the exports, most of the revenue from abroad comes from tech, and the tech sector, even though like every bounce back quick, because also it will be flexible to be able to go into things to do with biotech and other kinds of medical related things, and Israeli scientists are already working on that. I had a briefing yesterday with a team from one of the big one of the big international credit ratings agencies, who are trying to assess Israel's credit rating over the next few years. And I said to them, it seems a strange time to be doing this now, when the world and the global economy is in such a uncertain. But they said, actually, we think that Israel is well positioned to come out of this crisis quickly. They're the experts, and I think they're right in this case. And if they're right, if it does happen, you can be sure that Netanyahu will take credit for it the moment it happens.
Of course. Okay, so to move slightly, what do you think all this means for the prospect of the future of a genuine Jewish-Arab political partnership? Is there any chance?
Well, I mean, as we're speaking tonight, the joint list leaders, the party which now represent 90% of Arab Israeli voters, they're feeling very disappointed. They're feeling very let down by Benny Gantz, because last Sunday, they went to the president and endorsed Gantz. All of them, all components of the joint list, including the Arab nationalists of Balad and the Islamists and the communists, they all endorsed Benny Gantz, who, let's remember, is not exactly he's the IDF in some of the bloodiest campaigns in Gaza. They all endorsed him because they all really want to get rid of Netanyahu. And then Benny Gantz, 9 days later, turns around and goes and seems to be going with Netanyahu. So they're feeling let down. They're feeling that Gantz has, in a way, betrayed them. But I think the fact that we've seen this breakthrough in this election, that we've seen the joint list, all the representatives of Arab Israelis endorsing a candidate, is that was crossing a Rubicon in many ways, and I think that we're not going to go back from that moment. And one of the reasons the joint list did that, the joint list, I think, is much more radical than a lot of the Arab Israeli voters. Now, 90% of Arab Israeli voters voted for the joint list, partly because none of the other parties, none of the so-called Jewish parties, put an Arab representative on a prominent place on their lists of candidates, on their slates. So they felt that they only had one party representing them anyway. But that part of that is a real desire for representation, a real desire to be part of the mainstream political game. And what we've seen here is that it was very easy for Netanyahu to delegitimize the joint list, partly because the joint list has given him, members of the joint list, some of the MKs there, have given him over the ammunition with which to delegitimize them by saying various praise for Palestinian terrorists and various things they've said about how they are against the Jewish character of Israel. So, and at the same time, there really is a desire to be part of Israeli society. So I think what we're going to see in future elections, and I would bet on it happening in the very next election, is the centre-left parties, which are in opposition to Netanyahu, putting Arab candidates in much stronger, in much more prominent places on their list as candidates. And I think we won't see the turnout in the Arab sector, which was very high in this election, was 65%, which is the highest it's been for over 20 years in the Arab sector. We won't see it going down. We will see part of it leaving the joint list and going to other centre-left parties, which have a better chance of being part of the mainstream. And through them, I think Arab Israelis will feel that they have a better chance of also gaining some kind of political and public influence.
Okay, I'm going to ask two more questions because the sound's not brilliant, so I don't want the concentration to drop. Just a few people have asked about the potential annexation of large sections of the West Bank as per the Trump plan. What do you think?
Well, if Benny Gantz has said that in principle he's not against annexing parts of the West Bank to Israel, but he doesn't want to do that without not in coordination with the international community and against the wishes of Israel's Arab neighbors, Jordan and Egypt, with which Israel has diplomatic. In other words, he doesn't think it should be done anytime soon. And if he is a major part of the next government, which is what seems to be happening now, it means that the Trump plan is on hold for now. And I say the Trump plan is on hold for now anyway, because the only plans right now are public health and pandemic fighting plans. And once that's over, whenever that's over, then people will start reordering, or Israel will start reordering its priorities anyway. So I think that right now, everyone has much bigger issues to worry about. And I almost want to be at the point where we can start worrying once again about annexation and the implications of that. But we're not there now, and we won't be if Gantz becomes a major part of the government. I mean, that is at least one thing that the opposition in Israel, the centre-left, or what we used to call the peace camp, can perhaps be happy about right now.
Okay, thank you. So finally, do you think the joint list is up for engagement with mainstream Jewish communities outside Israel?
I think they are engaging. I think I know that Ayman Uda especially does quite a lot of speaking events with Jewish groups, both visiting Israel and when he himself goes abroad, especially in the United States. There is scope for there, whether it's the joint list or whether it's other Arab Israeli groups. And I think that I'm speaking now mainly to a Jewish diaspora audience. I think the diaspora has so much to teach Israel how to conduct better relations between communities. And sadly, we've seen once again in this election and its aftermath that Israel has a long way to go. Israel's got many incredible achievements, but improving relationships between communities, both between Jewish communities, we're seeing now a very serious disconnect between the mainstream and ultra-Orthodox communities here in Israel, with Orthodox communities, some of them not being at all connected to what's happening with facing the pandemic. And at the same time, we're seeing the most incredible work together of Jewish and Arab doctors and nurses and other medical personnel together, shoulder by shoulder, in every single Israeli hospital. And at the same time, their political representatives have been delegitimized by the Prime Minister. So yeah, there is so much to be done here, and hopefully Jews around the world will also contribute their wisdom and good wishes and their philanthropy perhaps to organizations working on these things. And there is certainly scope for that kind of engagement, no question about it.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Anshel. I'm just going to see, Raymond, do you want to say a few words? Hopefully. Okay.
Oh, you're still there?
I just thought you wouldn't want to see my actual face throughout the whole thing, just my avatar face.
I've been missing it for the last 40 minutes.
Wow, this was as I said at the start, our first experience of doing something like this. We had up to about 120 people at one point online, and a constant 60 odd households engaging with us and watching and joining in, and watching the questions come in on the stream. Those of you that have the group chat open, it's fascinating to see. If you've ever been to any JW3 event before, or if you've ever heard me speak before, then you will know that our mission really is to increase the quality, the variety, and the volume of Jewish conversation, both in the Jewish community and outside. And I think this evening has proved that just because the physical doors to the building are temporarily closed, that doesn't prevent us, when we can have people like Anshel engage us in this way, doesn't prevent us from increasing, in this case, particularly the quality of the conversation. To have such an insight from a person right at the heart of what is going on was a real treat and a real pleasure, even if it wasn't all necessarily uplifting for us. So Anshel, thank you so much for joining us. To all of you at your homes around the UK, I know there's some people here in Israel, in the States and South Africa, just from a few of the people I recognize. Here's what I'll ask you to do before you go. If you put your cursor near the bottom of the screen, where the options are invite, participants, share screen. On the right, it's got reactions. It's a little emoji face. If you click on it, there are two options. There's a thumbs up or there's an applause. I think now's a great chance to give Anshel a virtual round of applause. It's the safest way to do it without touching anyone. Social distance appreciation.
All I want is to be back in JW3 very soon and see you face to face, and not over a screen, Raymond.
Bezrat Hashem.
Hopefully, Bezrat Hashem and Bezrat Harofim and all the great Jewish and Arab doctors in Israel, and the fantastic doctors at the NHS and everywhere in the world. I mean, it's kind of fun doing this on screens, but it's not.
We will do it in person. We'll do it in person soon. And until then, everyone, just make sure, this is all new to us and we are trying to get the word out as quickly as we can. But it doesn't mean we're necessarily doing it without making a few mistakes and being a bit clumsy. So the best thing to do is make sure that you're signed up on our website to get emails. Follow us on Facebook and on Twitter if you use either of those, and look at jewishonline.jw3.org.uk. So that's Jewish Online. I'll try and type it in here. jewishonline.jw3.org.uk. And that's not just JW3's events, but that's events taking place all over British Jewry that you might want to, whether you want to daven in an Orthodox shul in the morning, listen to a Reform rabbi in the afternoon, and check out another JW3 lecture in the evening. It's the best of British Jewry in one place. So stay safe, keep home, and thank you to any of you that work for the NHS.